Hi there, U.S. History students. Welcome. We got lesson 9.3 here today. One of my favorites in the whole school year, about America in the 1950s. Our targets, we're going to talk about the suburbs. Most of you are going to be watching this from the suburbs. And so that is a American phenomenon that really begins in earnest here in the 1950s. We're going to talk about family life. All of us are drinking deep from the dregs of family life right now. Like, we are getting maximum family life. And I want to talk about the ideal of 1950s family life and the good and the bad that goes along with that. And of course, all along this whole unit, as we talk about contemporary America, we're talking about the good life. And what does the good life mean? And I'm going to talk to you about a particular vision of the good life that felt very, very real to Americans in the 1950s. And we're going to evaluate what we think of that. I think that a key way to understand some of the stuff we're going to learn about today, or where did this come from, is just to contextualize it and recall where were Americans coming out of. All right? The culture of the 1950s, which is really predicated on this idea of comfort and conformity, is a result, in large part, a result of people living through the trauma of the Great Depression and then the even deeper trauma of World War II, and everyone kind of coming out of that a little bit like zombies, or a little bit like with their hair singed, right? And just being like, I just want some peace and quiet, right? Are we all agreed? The most important thing right now is just some normal peace and quiet. Can we just get a picnic table in a backyard and a white picket fence and some nice, relaxing, calm, normal music and just some peace and quiet for maybe a decade here, and let us catch our breath? And that's sort of in some part where the 1950s comes out of, right? And people were excited to have nicer things and to have newer things and to have comfortable things again. And can you blame them? I mean, can we really blame them? Can we really say, oh, shame on them, they were so consumeristic? I mean, how different are we, right? At the same time, we're going to see that not everybody was agreed that the most important thing was some peace and quiet, right? There were people, teenagers we'll learn about today, like teenagers are going to say, I don't want peace and quiet, I want adventure, right? Or in the next lessons, and then especially next week, we're going to look at like minority groups in the United States are saying, you know, we're here too, right? I don't know, peace and quiet is fine, but also we would like to sort of take part in this in the same way that everyone else is. And so that's a whole other story that's happening in the 1950s, right? As we do this lesson today, guys, I want you to have your antenna up for idols, all right? For things that we place in front of God, right? In terms of what we say that we need. We are going to, in history class, we learn to be discerners of idols. But there's an old passage here from the Old Testament that I think if we contextualize, if we frame this lesson around using this verse, I think we might see some interesting things. So let's pause here for a moment and just read this passage from Deuteronomy. Now therefore write this song and teach it to the people of Israel. Put it in their mouths, that this song may be a witness for me against the people of Israel. For when I have brought them into the land flowing with milk and honey, which I swore to give to their fathers, and they have eaten and are full and grown fat, they will turn to other gods and serve them, and despise me and break my covenant. Let's use that to frame some of what we're going to learn about today. So, where to begin? Let's begin with where people were living. There is a great desire in the post-war period for people to have their own small slice of heaven, as I said. And what is a small slice of heaven? A small slice of heaven is a single-family home. A small slice of heaven is a single-family home and a car and a driveway and a garage and a backyard and a little lawn to mow and a white picket fence and a wife and 2.5 kids, right? And this is now becoming possible for more and more people to have it, thanks in part to things like the GI Bill, which we learned about before, but also in part because of things like the highway system, the Eisenhower highway system, that is like allowing people to live farther from where they work and commute more quickly in their own vehicle, provided they have their own car, of course. New construction and development, real estate development techniques that allowed developers to buy, just, I don't know, cornfields and just build roads that don't really have right angles and start slapping up houses that are more or less identical, and then say to all these people with all these young families and all these families with 2.5, 3, 4, 5, 6 kids, who wants a home in the suburbs, right? And millions of hands shoot up. We do, we want this. It's not like it's just a quirky, smallish group of Americans that are moving into the suburbs, right? It's a third of the American population moves out of city centers into the suburbs, where they can find green grass, where they can find nice sidewalks, where they can find safe parks for their kids to play, where they can find, I don't know, nice schools with good teachers. Is any of this sounding familiar to the place where you guys live? It should be, right? And developers are building these houses rapidly. These houses were built on the cheap and built quickly, and they were very small, frankly, compared with houses today. But it's the same kind of principle where it's like you guys might, when you drive home, you might have that weird feeling of like, all the houses on my street look about the same, or it looks like there's maybe 3 models of house and like they sort of alternate between those 3. Do you have that feeling? Do you have that strange feeling of like eerie, almost ant-like conformity as you're driving around in the neighborhood where you live? I do. And so this is a funny thing, right? This is a funny thing where like 50s culture, you'll see it in some of the supplemental videos we do, 50s culture, it really is very much about like, we all want this thing together, right? We're all doing this thing together. And even the homes and places we lived all looked about the same. And we all go to these new McDonald's where it's like, regardless of which McDonald's you go to, the food is the same. We know what we can expect. And there's comfort in that, right? And it's sort of like this becomes the all-American ideal. There is this ideal that is strongly being imprinted through mass media, but that Americans also deeply desire because they just want a little peace and quiet, or they just want that small slice of heaven. And you have this sort of image of this like this sort of perfect young family and literally a white picket fence. You have these cars. I mean, 50s cars are just beautiful, right? They're built almost to look like, they're massive in those days, but they're sort of built to look like jets or like airplanes, and they're just huge and comfortable, and they allow you to sort of almost feel like you're taking your living room sofa to work with you that day, right? Even in the middle picture here, that's a mall. You might recognize that. That's the world's first indoor mall. It's there in Edina. It's Southdale Mall in Edina. So we were suburban pioneers here in Minnesota. But this sort of suburban culture that's popping up, it's all about comfort and conformity. There's a lot of pressures sort of that surround the culture of the 1950s that kind of, in a way, sort of corralled Americans, whether they willingly chose it or not. It kind of corralled Americans into a certain way of life and way of being. In part, they were sort of a context of the Red Scare or the Cold War, where it's like, we Americans, this is how we do things, and so whose side are you on? So join our team, and we're going to do it this way. In some part, there's maybe like a religious thought that's going into this, or like certain things that are virtues, and people are sort of being told this is how you should do it, right? And I want to say before I jump in, some of these things are really good. Some of these things are wise and smart and nice. The strange part about the 50s was the way that like just about everybody was sort of grabbed by the shoulders and sort of marched into this life like, this is how we are going to do this, right? Whether you choose it or not, or whether you like it or not, this is how life is done for us. And this is sort of the pressure of the ideal family life. And men and women felt these pressures differently. For men, let's say for a second here, for men, you were expected to be the breadwinner. That means you were expected to be to make the income for the family. And not even most of the income, you were expected to make all the income, right? Men, if you have a wife that works, that might, there's going to be some social strangeness for her at her workplace because that's seen as odd, but a lot of the kind of the narrow looks and the strange looks and the whispered comments are going to be about you. What's wrong with you that your wife has to work, right? This is a failing on you. What are you doing wrong that this is happening? And when you go to work, we're all going to dress about the same way every day, right? And all the guys are going to have the same haircut, and we're all going to wear the so-called gray flannel suit that was in style in the 1950s, and we're going to sort of be ants in our little ant farm, right? And then we're going to work for the same company and be loyal to the same company our whole lives, and then when we die, they'll give us a nice watch upon retirement, and they'll say, you were a company man. A loyal company man is something to aspire to, right? That's like the highest honor you can pay to a man. It's like you were loyal to the company and you did good work for the company and you did it for 50 years and now here's a watch and a slap on the back, right? Well done. For women, the pressures were different, all right? I'm not going to say it's better or worse, it's different. For women, it was like you shouldn't work outside the home. Certainly, I mean, if you're 20 years old and unmarried, then you can take a job doing secretarial work, doing teaching. Of course you can do these things, right? Once you get married, you should not work anymore. Once you have kids, you're just not going to work anymore, right? That's just not something that you will do, all right? Because at that point, your role is to be at home. And at home, you will manage the kids. You and Dad don't jointly manage the kids, jointly raise the kids. The kids are like your domain. You will make all the child rearing decisions. And Dad every now and again can get called in from the sidelines to be like, well, I think Jimmy should do this or that. But really at home, Dad is not to be bothered with the kids stuff. The kids should stay out of Dad's hair because Dad's had a hard day at work, right? And wives, I mean, like this image here. This image is preposterous. I love sharing this with my wife every now and again. But like, she's literally put on high heels to vacuum the floor, and she's wearing all her makeup, and her hair is done. And it's like because she's expected to look pretty for her husband when he gets home. Because you know there's secretaries at the office who look pretty, right? And you want to make sure that you're sort of keeping up. And you don't want your husband's eyes to stray and all this kind of stuff, right? And everyone is expected to go along with this. In the 1950s, 90%, between 88 and 90% of adults who were eligible to be married, like not in prison, were married. Everybody is told to do this. Everybody will do this. And unless you're one of those people who just loves to not conform and loves to stick out in the crowd, you're going to go along with this, right? Now, on some level, maybe that's good, right? I will say, my own experience of getting married, there's a lot of knuckleheads out there in life, and I used to be one of them. And getting married does burn a lot of bad habits out of you. You recognize real fast how selfish you are and all this stuff, and it really does kind of splash cold water in your face and force you to grow up. Having kids will do the same thing. So maybe in that sense there's some good stuff there, but it's also weird when everybody's made to do this. And if you get divorced, there is a heavy stigma. It is weird, right? It is whispered about. Everybody knows it. And you just sort of become persona non grata if you're the one who got divorced. All right, so it's a strange culture to live in some ways. Did it sort of produce more virtue on a macro level because we're all sort of forced down these paths? Yeah, sure, I suppose, right? Did it always feel comfortable for everybody? Absolutely not. You know, television is this ultimate consumer good of the 1950s. And the products being produced to be consumed on television, right? The programming that was on television was all comfortable, very vanilla, very designed to be easily digested, and it sort of kept perpetuating the same notion, right? Like the family situation comedy or sitcom was the thing that's just pumped out in those days on televisions. And you look around and yeah, pretty much all these families look about the same, and the problems don't really rise that high, right? The problems don't rise too far beyond well, Jimmy's not sure what's going to happen with his science test, and how is he going to get ready for this? And his friend Billy says he might cheat. And then at the end, Dad says, Billy, I don't think you should be cheating. And Billy's like, gee, Dad, I think you're right. And we solve that problem, right? And then, but it's just sort of it's this churn of stuff like this. And so it's telling Americans this is how we are, this is who we are, this is what you participate in, this is how you do it. And again, if you're someone that's like, well, I don't look like that, or I don't know if I want that, or I don't know if I want to get married, or my family doesn't look like that, all right, or we don't look that happy, then it's just like, well, then just be quiet. Mass consumption is back in vogue because we talked about our economy being roaring back, and consumption in the 1950s has to do with automobiles, of course. That's like the ultimate American consumer good, but then it also has to do with televisions, the new like quintessential consumer product in the 1950s. In 1950, like TVs are obscure and rare. By 1960, they're in like virtually every home, and everyone's staring at it all the time. So yeah, I'd also say another interesting area of consumerism now is children's toys, right? A, the baby boom means there's so many more toys available. B, we have more money, right? In the Great Depression, you know, the kids' toy stores like the Woods, go find a stick, that's your new toy, Merry Christmas, right? And now in the 1950s, everyone sort of has these sort of these toys that are being produced for kids, and they're finding out parents spend a lot of money on their kids, and it becomes something that can really drive things economically as kids' toys. That's a change in the 50s, and it's certainly still true today. Let's talk about one great American invention that we haven't gotten to yet. Not the light bulb, right? Not even our Constitution or jazz music. Let's talk about the teenager. Throughout all of human history, there was no concept of a teenager, right? There's like, you're a kid, and then somewhere around 14, 15, you're essentially an adult, all right? Get to work, get a job, and that's sort of it. There was no real understanding that there's a sort of funny thing that happens in adolescence, and it ends, around age, whatever, 19, 20, or I don't know, maybe today we think it goes to age 25, or, I mean, how old is Seth Rogen now? He still is effectively a teenager, right? I mean, like, this is sort of this thing we've invented where there's this period of time where you leave the family, right? You make bad decisions, or you make more reckless decisions, like these reckless teens here out drinking soda pops with their friends. And you kind of try on different identity hats and figure all that stuff out. And I don't want to sound like I'm dismissing that, because I do think actually we stumble upon, like, developmentally, there is a very real stage there, right? There is a real thing, and we did sort of uncover that. But like the teenager with a capital T and what it means to be a teenager is very much an American invention of the post-war period. There is identity found in peer groups rather than family groups, right? And when time is being spent with peer groups, you're forming a distinct subculture that's different than your parents' culture. And you're looking for cultural pieces that act maybe a little bit more as a wedge with your family. Like, this is mine, and the fact that my parents don't like it makes it more firmly mine, and I hold on to it even more tightly because this is mine and it's not theirs, right? And that's something that gets developed in the 1950s because people now have money where their kids don't have to go off and work in coal mines, right? Or start working on the farm because it's a depression. We have expendable income. There's automobiles available, which gives you the freedom to get away from home, and music, specifically the birth of rock and roll music, which is a beautiful, great American invention. Rock and roll music is pioneered by black artists like Chuck Berry, who you see pictured here and who you'll learn more about in the video. And the fact that it's pioneered by black artists, and it was known as race music for a long time, means that when white parents who are sort of like a pretty buttoned up, right, and used to wear the gray flannel suit, get home and hear their precious daughter, Cindy Lou, listening to black artists on the radio upstairs, it's like, oh, we are not doing this, right? No, thank you. And that becomes a sort of key wedge piece in marking a generational divide in the 1950s, right? Teenagers are like thrashing against some of the conformity. A figure like Elvis Presley is really critical and key. He's extremely talented and he's very, very good, but he's a white artist who's as skilled as those black artists, right? Who's sort of bringing this black music to a white audience. And when teenage girls sort of get their eyes on him, well, it's kind of meltdown city, and it's game over. And you'll see some video evidence to that effect later on. So yeah, that's my snapshot glimpse at 1950s culture, right? You'll explore it a little bit more later, and we will return to some of these ideas later, but think back to that question of an idol. Was there an idol here, right? What do you see? How much of this do you see as like safe and cozy and upright and kind of a good old days kind of picture? Or how much do you look back at that and say, that is just repressed, or that is dull? What do you see? Anyway, I enjoyed talking about these ideas with you. I look forward to your Flipgrid responses and seeing what you guys have to say. Take care, guys.